In the beginning, man believed flight to be the privilege of mythological gods. The gods of Crete, of Egypt, of Assyria, and of Greece. As man's capabilities developed, so developed his power to dream of his own ability to fly. Leonardo da Vinci, whose genius stands in marked contrast to the ideas of his contemporaries. If it were not for the dreams in his fertile mind and the dreams in the minds of generations that followed, there would have been no tomorrow. Throughout history, throughout the world, the achievement of sustained, controlled, and powered flight eluded man. The dream was there, but never fulfilled. Sir George Cayley, with his revolutionary wing designs, solved the problems of lift. Steam and clockwork planes followed in 1857. Mosaiski's 1884 steam plane almost succeeded. Then, in 1903, the Wright brothers flew and created fresh dreams in the minds of the young.
In 1903, an unassuming pair of bicycle makers established America as where much of the history of aviation would be written. In less than a lifetime, man would fly to the moon. Over almost a century, the name of one man is stamped on nearly every milestone of aviation history. It all began for William Boeing on the banks of Seattle's Lake Union in an old red barn. It was where it all began, too, for one of his first employees.
I'm Mike Pavoni, and I was born in 1903, the same year that Orville Wright flew at Kitty Hawk. And ever since I can remember, when I was 6 years old, I passed an airplane over here on Harbor Island, and I was fascinated by it. And a couple of years later, my dad and I, we went to South Tacoma to see the horse races. And we passed an airplane there that was taking up rides for people. And my dad had to jerk me out of there and then go to the horse races. And ever since then, I was really fascinated with the aircraft. And later, when I got through school, I went down to Boeing's, and I hired in 1920 as an apprentice mechanic. And that was the start of my career there with aviation.
William Boeing was born in Detroit in 1881 of wealthy German parents. Educated in Switzerland and at Yale, he moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1903. Having already developed a love of fast cars and boats, the events at Kitty Hawk implanted a new challenge, the challenge of flight. But it was not until 1915, when he met Conrad Westervelt of the US Navy, that his dream would be realized, when, after buying a Martin seaplane and dismantling it, they decided they could build a better one.
This is where it all began. The B&W, built in 1916. 13 years after the Wright brothers. There were two of them built. One of them was exported to New Zealand. The other one remained here in Seattle.
The B&Ws were shown to the US Navy, who suggested various modifications for use as a trainer. And as America entered the war, they placed an order for 50 of the craft. orders for the Boeing C, as it was designated, soon waned as the war drew to a close, and Boeing had to ride out the slump using his own resources, at one stage making furniture and sea sleds. It is now 1923, and Boeing has developed a system of arc welding steel tubes to replace the timber then in use. And it was the success of this new construction method and the company's aggressive pursuit of military orders that made it, by 1927, one of the largest aircraft companies in the USA. Throughout the late 20s and 30s, William Boeing continued to develop the company. His perfectionism and ability to choose the right associates were his greatest assets. The company continued to attract orders for fighter and military training aircraft, as well as building a series of seaplanes for the US mail service. In 1927, Boeing outbid all competition for this lucrative service between San Francisco and Chicago. And although bankruptcy was predicted by his rivals, the Type 40 mail plane, which carried passengers as well as considerable amounts of mail, saved the day. "24 were rushed into service in just 2 years of operation, carrying 1,300 tons of mail and 6,500 passengers. Boeing had set new standards and still made a profit. From these profits, he went on to form his own airline, Boeing Air Transport, later to be called United Airlines. There followed a series of innovations both in design and airline management. The Model 80 airliner became the first to carry a stewardess. Then, in 1930, came the Model 200 monomail. Only 2 were built, but the method of construction using duralium spars and sheeting was to have a far-reaching effect on the industry. It marked the death knell of the biplane airliner. Owing much to the monorail, Boeing then developed the Model 247, which first flew in 1933. It was, however, overshadowed by its commercial rival, the Douglas DC-3. Boeing's then began a series of super-large aircraft, something they were to become famous for. In 1938 came the Boeing Tipper, which set new standards of passenger comfort and became the pioneer of long-haul flight. It was the experience gained building huge aircraft such as the Tipper and the darkening war clouds over Europe that encouraged Boeing to enter the field of large bomber aircraft. The 294, at the time the largest aircraft in the world, was developed from an earlier model designated the 299. Although grossly underpowered, they were to be the stepping stones to one of the most famous aircraft to see service in the Second World War. Who was president of the company at that time, had the wisdom to realize that the government specification for a multi-engined aircraft could mean 4, and recommended that the company should go ahead with the design of the 299. Its ability to sustain battle damage had a lot to do with the construction techniques used initially on the monomail. The aircraft was built in separate components and could be assembled in units or by subcontractors, thus making it possible to produce large numbers of aircraft from relatively small factories. The B-17 had been born, and with America's eventual involvement in the Second World War, production began in earnest.
Well, of course, we were working 3 shifts a day and basically 7 days a week, which certainly contributed to the high rate. And we had lots of people, you know, and it was very noisy, but it wasn't really confusing. We had the wing line, and we had the engine shop, and, you know, we had the final assembly, and, you know, it was just very compact, and of course it grew with the rates, you know.
Many of the changes were changes dictated by experience in combat. The first of these, of course, most obvious was the tail turret, which was installed first on the B-17E, and then additional armament and revisions to armament were made all throughout the life of the program to add the firepower where it was needed, or to add armor plate or protection of various kinds as required by combat experience. Using hindsight, of course, you could have designed it as a B-52, but without hindsight, there aren't very many changes that appeared to be necessary that didn't get made.
The B-17 was to become a familiar sight in eastern England. Nearly 13,000 were to be built, mainly by Boeing, but also with the help of subcontractors Douglas and Lockheed. Over 5,000 were lost in combat, yet it accounted for over 6,500 enemy planes, nearly half the total shot down by US aircraft. And it was a bomber, not a fighter. It is one of the ironies of war that if William Boeing's father, Wilhelm, had not chosen to emigrate to America, Boeings might well have been flying alongside Heinkel's and Dornier's. In 1985, on the 50th anniversary of the B-17, some of the wartime air crews met again in Seattle.
Yeah, that was cold. Your hands would freeze. Your feet would get cold. God, you're frostbitten. The oil masks would leak. Now, ice about 2 inches thick, right along here. They once said that 2 gunners in here is like 2 guys with jackhammers in a telephone booth. We had to, we took turns, you know, we had to make sure that we were out of each other's way. We were always bumping rears. And then the cartridge is on the floor. It's like a roller coaster.
Too fat at 6 o'clock, I'm coming in, diving at T. B-17 in trouble out at 2 o'clock, watching. Got an engine on fire. They're breaking at 11, breaking at 11. I got him. He's coming around underneath at 10 o'clock.
He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighters. Keep your eye on them, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan?
Parachutes open. Flag at 9 o'clock.
8th man still in that B-17. Come on, the rest of you guys. Get out of there.
Come on, Bill.
So far, there's 3 more shoots. Flag at 11 o'clock.
Fighters, 6 o'clock. ME-109 at 3 o'clock. Keep that.
Chief, look, he's bailing out.
Yell on that intercom.
Fighters, 10 o'clock. Watch those 2 and 12, Ben. They're coming in. They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on them.
Save the ammunition as much as possible.
It is a sad fact of life that an invention as potentially beneficial as the aircraft should be used for the wholesale destruction of man. Jean Genet, a poet of the 40s, wrote, "Suddenly at night the bombers came in the hard reverberating bowl of the sky, destroying the factory and the tall cathedral, the dock, the warehouse and the railway station, the rich house in the leafy avenue, and the shouldering tenements of the narrow streets, and the bodies and souls of men." I sought my son among the smoking stones where I had crouched with him clutched at my breast, until the bomb burst and the building shattered down, and the dark came and severed my son from me. I cried out with a voice harsh in my throat, "My son, I have lost my son."
You ask about being scared? Yes, we were scared. We were thankful when we were coming back because we lost a few of the boys there.
B-17Fs and started going in deep penetration, we didn't have fighter escorts to go very far. We had P-47s, but they'd only go in a short ways, and then they'd have to leave us, and then the Germans would take over, and it scared us to death.
We've ever been going down the highway about 60, 70 miles an hour, and some guy swerves over, and you get that feeling through you that you're going to be hit. Well, that's that feeling you have for hours at a time. And after a while, it's just, you just accept it. It's like hanging. You take your hang long enough and you're used to it.
It was able to go higher than our other bombers, for one thing. So that put the war up higher. And that was all to the good, because it got us up at least part of the way out of the flak and stuff. So the B-17, of course, was able to take, I think, more punishment than any of the rest of our bombers.
Well, I don't think that they were thinking about the strength of the airplane. They just knew that they had a weapon, and it was the only weapon that they had, and they were going to use it. And they did use it, and they used it with extreme effectiveness.
It happened when, soon after takeoff, on the return, almost made it. It ended for Ralph, Jack, Richard, Carl, Randolph, Russell, Louis. Here in this Norfolk field, the bite of metal on this too unsolid flesh. The stone of passing interest to walkers in the summer, buffeted by the eastern winds, still warrants flowers from someone. Good as the B-17 was, the US Army had a need for a high-altitude pressurized bomber. Before the war, Boeing had developed the Stratoliner with a supercharger and a sealed fuselage. 4 were even ordered by Pan American as passenger airliners. But the prototype stalled and crashed on March the 18th, 1939. As a result, new fins were fitted, and with the experience gained with the B-17, the Model 294 and the Stratoliner led, in 1942, to the B-29 bomber. With its pressurized crew compartments and its 4 Wright engines, it was capable of 315 knots and a service ceiling of 32,000 feet. It was the heaviest combat aircraft to enter service in World War II and was used mainly in the Pacific, becoming involved in various heavy raids on the Japanese mainland. On August the 6th, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay took off from Tinian. Piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, it dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It devastated the city, killing over 75,000 people. On August the 9th, a second B-29 dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. Mara Tamiki, a Japanese poet of the 40s who suffered radiation burns and sickness and who later committed suicide, wrote, "In the fire, a telegraph pole. At the heart of the fire, a telegraph pole like a stamen, like a candle, blazing up like a molten red stamen. In the heart of the fire, on the other bank from the morning, one by one, fear screamed through men's eyes. At the heart of the fire, a telegraph pole, like a stamen." For flyers, the age of innocence was finally over. The dream had turned into a nightmare. Prior to and during the war, development work had taken place in Europe on the gas turbine engine, and by 1945, a number of single and multi-engine jet aircraft had been flown in Great Britain and Germany. Amongst them, the famous ME-262, which the B-17s were to meet during the closing stages of the war. In 1943, the United States Army Air Force had issued its requirements for a jet bomber, and in 1945, with access to the work in Germany, as well as its own research, Boeing started development of the B-47, which first flew in 1947. With its high aspect ratio wing and 6 engines, it presented its pilots with many problems. The wing could flex as much as 17 feet at its tip, and at certain altitudes, moving the stick back would result in a slow speed stall, and moving it forward resulted in high speed buffeting, which became known as coffin corner. A British designer said of the B-47, it had little control at high speed, had to be landed through a letterbox, and would never be accepted at Boscombe Down, the British Aircraft Evaluation Centre. But yet again, valuable lessons were learned and put into use in its successor, the B-52.
This is Boeing Tower. You are cleared to make a straight-in approach to runway 13. Wind southwest 25. Gust to 35. Extreme caution. 80 to 90 degree right crosswind. Report at Harbor Island. Over. 005, roger on crosswind condition. Gear down.
The work on the B-47 and B-52 was to stand Boeing in good stead for the commercial battles to come. Production director Joseph Sutter continues the story.
Going back to World War II, if you remember, Boeing got heavily involved in bombers, B-17s and B-29s for the war effort, and that really put Boeing out of the commercial business for several years. At the end of the war, Boeing, with the desire of getting back in the commercial business, first developed an airplane derived from the B-29 using that wing, and it used a very, very large reciprocating engine. But jets had started development in World War II, and over in England, de Havilland, using a ghost engine developed by their own company, was developing the Comet. Boeing was watching that activity very hard. Boeing, meanwhile, had developed the B-47 bomber, which was a pure jet. And it was obvious that the jet engine was going to produce a dramatic improvement in reliability, performance, and we believed in economics and finally in range when the engines quit burning so much fuel. The Comet made quite an impression and pretty much proved that jet travel was going to be far superior to struggling through the air at 20,000 feet and in the clouds and slow speed. So when an engine came along that looked like it was going to produce an efficient jet, we immediately began exploring the possibility of jet airplanes. Boeing first did it by using a Pratt & Whitney engine and building a prototype. We called it the 367-80. It was actually the prototype of the 707 airplane. It was built using Boeing's own fund. Only one airplane was built. It was never intended to certify it or put that particular model in service. It was to prove the concept. And the Dash 80 really made quite an impression and very quickly developed into the 707 program. That first model was a intercontinental model. New York to London was one of the prime routes. Pan American, British Airways were a couple of the key customers. That kept developing from model to model, and we finally built about 900 of those airplanes, and the 707 really did a lot towards establishing long-haul jet travel.
The 707 was to become one of the best-known aircraft in the world and was to help in the development of a new military order, the KC-135 tanker, which was built for the United States Air Force, and is seen here being rolled out for the first time in July 1956 alongside the KC-97, which it was designed to replace. Had it not been for the military orders, things could have been tough for Boeing. It was not until 1963, when over 1,000 707s had been sold, that the aircraft moved into profit. However, Boeing's next aircraft, the medium-haul 727, was to become the world's best-selling airliner, with nearly 2,000 entering service around the world. With the smaller 737, together they formed the backbone of major airlines.
Well, after the 707 and a much greater acceptance of air travel, it was obvious that if that efficiency could be built in other airplanes, the whole air transportation system could take off and produce quite a bit of benefits to everybody, including profits to the operators. So Boeing then pursued medium-haul airplanes like the 727 and finally all the way down to the little 737. So the jets really covered the whole field. Air travel really did take off because of the jets, and it was obvious that the next step is to try and satisfy a bigger market demand. More people wanted to travel. The cost of air travel was still a little bit too high. The way to improve that is to go after better efficiency, which meant improved engines and better aerodynamics, better structure, and larger capacities. Boeing, in discussing this situation with the major potential customers, was amazed to find out that the airplanes we were thinking of were too small. And that really was the bringing into being of an airplane the size of the 747. That size was not picked by Boeing. It was picked by airlines like Pan American, British Airways, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines. And it was quite a shock to we engineers when they asked us to produce an airplane that large, especially with a brand new style of engine called a high bypass ratio engine. And you have to give a lot of credit to the engine manufacturers. Without those kind of engines, we couldn't be making the type of airplanes like the 747. But the combination of the very efficient high bypass ratio engine, also it gave us the ability to lift that capacity into the air. That produced operating economics that really produced air transportation as we know it today. It was a very, very bold gamble. Boeing was putting the net worth of the company online. It exhausted Boeing's resources, and Boeing got pretty thin financially at the time we delivered the first 747. I think that kind of a gamble would be hard to take today.
On February the 9th, 1969, after days of sub-zero conditions, the 747 and its crew were ready for the first flight. The rain and cold conditions still threatened, and the hoped-for break in the weather did not materialize. They waited for a break in the clouds that covered Payne Field, Everett, Washington State. Then, just before noon, the hoped-for break in the clouds came, and the 747's crew decided to attempt a takeoff. In less than 1,000 yards of runway, the 16-wheeled, 317-ton largest passenger aircraft in the world took to the air.
Heading 240, 1,500 feet, little turbulence. The old girl soaks that turbulence up very nicely. Okay, turning left. Turn coordinator is working, doing its job normally, apparently, and the airplane is just excellent.
After a little over an hour's flying, the 747 heads for home. It was to be the beginning of a new era of jet transport, carrying more people further and faster. The age of the jumbo was born.
Hi, Al. Jack, how are you? Good, good. Well, first things first. Good, always, right?
Okay, Jack, natural question is, what are your impressions?
Well, Al, I guess this sounds complacent or something, but that thing is just ridiculously easy to fly. It's just a pilot's dream.
The SST program had a lot of problems with it. It somewhat got involved with national objectives, which didn't make economic sense. And Boeing was developing a very good and efficient SST, but frankly, it didn't have enough range or capacity to offer supersonic flight at the economic level that would allow enough people to buy a ticket. And that really is why the SST disappeared in the mid-1970s. It was competing against the 747, and there was no competition. There is improvements in technology. The engine manufacturers know potentially what kind of engine we need. It will be a tremendous investment in that kind of engine in airplane. And it'll come, but it's still going to be a long ways off because of the very, very large amount of financial input into the program. But it'll happen.
In 1960, Boeing acquired the Vertol Aircraft Corporation in Morton, Pennsylvania. Frank Piasecki had developed and flown a large tandem rotor helicopter in 1945, at the time the largest helicopter built, carrying 10 passengers. Various developments followed, resulting in the H-21 series, known in the Army as the Flying Banana. Seen here working on offshore posts that serve as part of the early warning system for the United States. With their large capacity, they did valuable rescue work during the Andrea Doria disaster and during the floods in Mexico. From the Flying Banana, Boeing went on to develop the Chinook battlefield helicopter, 550 of which were used in Vietnam. By now, the company had grown from just 21 at the old Red Barn to over 130,000, some of whom are working on the new generation of jet transports.
Renton Tower, Boeing 757 is ready to taxi into position.
Boeing 757, proceed on the runway.
757.
Wind 170 at 20.
Roger. Boeing 757 ready for takeoff.
Boeing 757 cleared to takeoff runway 33, wind 180 at 24.
Roger.
Boeing 757 contract scale departure 119.5. Good day.
Thank you very much. We'll be talking to you again soon.
Got some good weather down in Renton and snuck off, found some blue sky up north here. And we basically checked the airplane at all flap settings, all speeds below 250 knots. We checked initial buffet at each flap setting. And we checked the max placker speed at each flap setting. Also, we retracted and lowered the gear.
Very routine flight.
It was fantastic in the fact that everything went just as programmed. Couldn't have written a better script. So far, from what we've felt, it's a very nice handling airplane. It's a very straightforward, honest, nice handling airplane.
This is Boeing 757 experimental.
Boeing 757 experimental, Payne Tower.
We'd like to turn inbound for your airport.
757 experimental, roger, wind 190 at 20, peak gust 38, altimeter 2991.
Roger, 2991. A windy day, isn't it?
Oh, got a little bit.
Naturally, 57 would like to do a 180 on the runway and taxi to the Boeing ramp.
757, 180 approved, taxi to the ramp.
Okay, we'll do it. Thank you.
Looks like you had a little bit of bumpiness there.
Well, a little bit. It was different than sometimes.
But by now, Boeing's new rival in the civilian aircraft marketplace, the European Consortium of Airbus Industry, began to pose a serious threat with its wide-ranging series of Airbus variants. Consequently, the competition spurred on Boeing's development of an even wider range of new aircraft, and the higher capacity 767 soon followed. In 1990, Boeing broadened its horizons even further when it launched its production program of a much higher capacity airliner, the twin-engine 777. It is perhaps indicative of future passenger transport aircraft demands that just 2 years after its maiden flight on the 12th of June 1994, Boeing was producing its 50th 777. Remarkably, just 3 years later, on the 2nd of April 1997, a 777, equipped with Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines, broke a world record when it took just 41 hours and 59 minutes to circumnavigate the world in an easterly direction, having made just one stop in Kuala Lumpur. Nicknamed the Jumbo, the 747, pioneer of wide-bodied aircraft and workhorse of long-haul flight since the early 70s, is, for today's generation of travellers, the most remembered of the Boeing fleet. At a rate of 4 aircraft a month, the 400 version is now the only 747 being built. But it too, like most of its brothers, is being produced in many configurations. Strangest, and perhaps the most futuristic, is a modified cargo variant for the military, the AL-1A. Equipped with a long-range laser and electro-optic fire control, the AL-1A is designed to destroy ICBMs and cruise missiles in flight. 7 will be delivered to the US military by the year 2008. Boeing's long history of heavy aircraft production, meeting the needs of both civil and military aviation, is perhaps the most distinguishing feature of Boeing production. 21st century technology and its related high costs dictate the need for joint venture production, and Boeing has not been slow in recognizing this. The Boeing Sikorsky RAH-66 Comanche and the F-22, combining the skills of both Sikorsky and Lockheed, are but 2 examples. But as the century expires, the most significant development for Boeing and the 147,000 people it employs worldwide is the merger with another of America's major aircraft builders. McDonnell Douglas was itself founded by 2 of America's early pioneers, who merged their interests in 1967. 30 years later, he was to merge once more, this time with Boeing. Boeing is now the unrivaled leader of civil, military and space programs, and is set to begin the 21st century from a position of great strength. All a far cry from William Boeing's early dreams of flight in that small red barn on the banks of Lake Union over 80 years ago.